You write lecture number 5, physiotherapy. You write lecture number 5, physiotherapy. Next, look at the screen contents. Question number 1. Galvanization. Question number 2. Electrophoresis. Question number 3. Electrostimulation. Question number 4. Desenvasalization. Question number 5. UHF therapy. Question number 1. Galvanization. Question number 2. Electrophoresis. Question number 3. Electrostimulation. Question number 4. Desenvasalization. Question number 5. UHF therapy. You write in your copybook all information by contents. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by physiotherapy. Physiotherapy is the sphere of practical medicine that studies the effect of natural and artificially created by physical factors used for the treatment of patient disease, prevention and medical rehabilitation. You write in your copybook all information by physiotherapy. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. Next slide. Look at the screen. You write question number 1 in your lecture copybook. Question number 1, galvanization. You write in your lecture copybook question number 1, galvanization. This diagram only look. Attention, look. Next, Look at the screen. Look at the screen. All this information by galvanization you write in your copybook. Galvanization is a method of the physiotherapy that uses the impact on the human body for a therapeutic purpose, DC and low voltage. All this information you write in your copybook. This information you write in your copybook. This diagram. Only attention, look. All this information by galvanization is a method of the physiotherapy you write in your copybook. Next slide. Next slide. Look at the screen. Block diagram apparatus for galvanization. You write in your copybook this information. Block diagram apparatus for galvanization. This diagram you draw in your copybook. You draw big diagram. Finish draw. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by block diagram apparatus for galvanization. You write in your copybook, please. All this information you write in your copybook. This information by block diagram apparatus for galvanization. All this information you write in your copybook. Finish right, next slide, finish right, next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by effects arising in the body, tissue under the influence, apparatus for galvanization, electrolysis, asymmetry, ion asymmetry, polarization, electrodiffusion, and electroosmosis. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information by effect arising in the body, tissue under the influence, apparatus for galvanization you write in your copybook. Electrolysis, ion asymmetry, polarization, electrodiffusion, electroosmosis you write in your copybook. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by therapeutic effects of DC. All this information only attention read. This information by therapeutic effects of DC. The therapeutic effect of DC. All this information only attention read. Next slide. Look at the screen, question number 2. You write in your copybook question number 2. Electrophoresis. You write in your copybook question number 2, electrophoresis. You write question number 2, this diagram only attention look. This diagram only attention look. Next slide. Look at the screen. All this information by electrophoresis you write in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. Medical electrophoresis combined effect of the body of a constant electric current and input with the help of the drug. All this information you write in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by technique of electrophoresis. This diagram you draw in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. This information by technique of electrophoresis. Medical electrophoresis is performed using electrodes used for galvanizing. Medical electrophoresis is performed using electrodes used for galvanizing. This diagram you draw in your copybook. All this information by technique of electrophoresis you write in your copybook. Finish draw, finish write, next slide. Finish draw, finish write, next slide. Next, next. Look at the screen. The mechanism of influence on body tissue during electrophoresis. All this information by the mechanism of influence on body tissue during electrophoresis, you write in your copybook, please. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information by the mechanism of influence on body tissue during electrophoresis, you write in your copybook. Finish right, next slide. Finish right, next slide. Next. Look at the screen, question number 3. Electrostimulation. Electrostimulation. You write in your copybook question number 3. Electrostimulation. This diagram only look. This diagram only attention look. Question number 3. Electrostimulation. You write in your copybook question number 3. This diagram only look. Next. Next slide. Look at the screen, this diagram only look, this information about electrostimulation. You write in your copybook, electrostimulation, application of electric current for the initiation of string think activities of certain organs and systems. All this information by electrostimulation you write in your copybook. Electrostimulation, application of electric current for the initiation of strong think activities of certain organs and systems. All this information you write in your copybook. This diagram, only attention, look diagram. Next slide. Look at the screen. All this information by electrostimulation is an influence of the human body for physiotherapeutic methods. You write in your copybook. All this information by electrostimulation. You write in your copybook. All this information by electrostimulation. You write in your copybook. All this information by electrostimulation you write in your copybook. This is important information. Finish right, next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by stimulatory action of the single current pulse depends on form, duration, amplitude. All this information you write in your copybook. The stimulatory action of the single current pulse depends on form, duration, amplitude. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. The stimulation action of the single current pulse depends on form, duration, amplitude. All information write in your copybook. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by types of pulse. All this information you write in your copybook. You write types of pulse. This diagram by pulse. This information. This diagram you draw in your copybook. This information you write in your copybook. You draw this diagram and write this information. Draw this diagram, write this information. Draw diagram, write information. Draw diagram, write information. Draw diagram, write this information. All this information by types of pulse you write in your copybook. Finish write, finish draw. Next slide. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by Weiss-Lapicus law. All this information by Weiss-Lapicus law you write in your copybook. This mathematical description you write in your copybook. This mathematical description by Weiss-Lapicus law. All information by Weiss-Lapicus law you write in your copybook. All this information by Weiss-Lapicus law you write in your copybook. This mathematical description you write in your copybook too. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. Important information about aerobasis and chronicity. Conclusion. You write in your copybook all information by conclusion about aerobasis and chronicity. This diagram you draw in your copybook. You write this information by conclusion, and this diagram you draw in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by the therapeutic effect, only attention rate. This information by therapeutic effect, only attention rate. Only read this information. This information by therapeutic effect, only attention rate. Only read. This information by therapeutic effect, only attention rate. Finish it, next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by the use of electrical stimulation in medicine. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information by the use of electrical stimulation in medicine you write in your copybook. All information you write in your copybook. All this information by the use of electrical stimulation in medicine you write in your copybook. Finish right, next slide. Next slide. Look at the screen, this diagram by the use of electric stimulation in medicine. Attention, look all this diagram. This diagram by the use of electric stimulation in medicine. Attention, look all this diagram. Attention, look all this diagram. This diagram, the use of electric stimulation in medicine. Attention, look all this diagram. Next slide. Look at the screen. This diagram by use the electric stimulation in medicine. Attention, look this diagram. Attention, look this diagram. Next slide. Look at the screen, question number 4. You write in your copybook question number 4. Dersonalization. You write in your copybook question number 4. Question number 4. Dersonalization. You write in your copybook question number 4. Dersonalization. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by dersonalization you write in your copybook. This physical effect. All this information you write in your copybook. This information by dersonalization you write in your copybook. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by schematic representation of the pulses used in dersonalization. This diagram you draw in your copybook. This information you write in your copybook. Schematic representation of the pulses used in decentralization. This diagram you draw in your copybook, this information you write in your copybook. You draw big diagram, please. You draw big diagram. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information by theoretical foundation of the methods personalization. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook is information by theoretical foundation of the methods personalization. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. This information by theoretical foundation of the methods personalization. All information you write in your copybook. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. All this information by decentralization you write in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. This information by decentralization you write in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. Finish right, finish draw, next slide. Finish right, finish draw, next slide. Next. Next. Look at the screen. This information you write in your copybook. This information by nature personalization, physical nature personalization. This diagram you draw in your copybook. Sorry. This information by nature personalization. This diagram you draw in your copybook. This information you write in your copybook. This diagram you draw in your copybook. Sorry. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by local personalization. You write in your copybook this information. This diagram, this important part, apparate for personalization. Only attention look. This part operates for personalization. This information by local personalization you write in your copybook. This diagram only attention look. This diagram only attention look. This diagram representation important part operates for personalization. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. All this information by impact of the human body. All this information only read. All this information you only read. Attention read. This information by impact of the human body. All this information only read. This information by impact of the human body. Only read this information. Only read. This information. Only read. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. It's a diagram. Attention look. This information by personalization you write in your copybook. Personalization of the person, And here, the modern cosmetology and this strong man's perfectly is suitable for problem and glittering skin. All this information by personalization you write in your copybook. Personalization of the person, and here one the modern cosmetology to this strong man's perfectly is suitable for the problem and glittering skin. This diagram only look, this information you write in your copybook. This information you write in your copybook. This diagram, attention, look. Diagram, attention, look. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by another change, personalization, bactericidal and analgesic effects, and improve muscle performance and stimulation, castle, formation, activated defenses, tissue. All this information you write in your copybook. This diagram only attention look. This information by another change, personalization, bactericidal and analgesic effects, and improve muscle performance and stimulation, cause, formation, activated defenses, tissue. All this information you write in your copybook. This diagram only attention look. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. This information only read. This information by personalization. Another change, personalization in cosmetic presets, the most commonly used in cosmetic presets, cleaning facial for acne, and another. Only read, only look. This information only read, only look. This diagram only look. Information only read. This information another change. Personalization methods. Next slide. Look at the screen question number 5. You write in your copybook question number 5, UHF therapy. You write in your copybook question number 5, UHF therapy. UHF therapy. Question number 5. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by UHF therapy. All information you write in your copybook. UHF therapy is a method of physiotherapy. All this information you write in your copybook. Next slide. Next slide. Look at the screen. This diagram, attention, look. This information by apparatus UHF therapy. You write in your copybook. Apparatus UHF therapy consists of two blocks. One blocks generate sustained oscillation. Two blocks therapeutic counter. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. This diagram, only attention, look. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. This information by the block diagram of the apparatus UHF therapy. You write in your copybook this information and this diagram. You draw in your copybook, or you draw big diagram. This diagram you draw in your copybook. In your copybook you write this information too. Finish draw, next slide. Finish draw, next slide. Finish draw. Finish draw. Next slide. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. This information by generation. Sustained oscillations. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information by generation. Sustained oscillation you write in your copybook. Finish right, next slide. Finish right, next slide. Look at the screen. This information by a physical basis of the electric component of the electromagnetic field on the tissue of the body. Physical and chemical and thermal effects. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. Biophysical basis of the electric component of the electromagnetic field on the tissue of the body. Physical, chemical, and thermal effects. All this information you write in your copybook. Next, and next slide. Next. Look at the screen, all information by physical and chemical effect you write in your copybook. All this information you write in your copybook. This information by physical and chemical effect of UHF therapy. All this information by physical and chemical effect you write in your copybook. Finish right, next slide. Finish right, next slide. Next slide. Look at the screen. This information by thermal effect. You write in your copybook all this information by thermal effect. UHF therapy as a thermal effect. UHF therapy. All this information you write in your copybook. All this information by thermal effect you write in your copybook. Next slide. Finish right, next slide. Next. Look at the screen. This information only attention read. This information by the action of the electric field in the UHF body is closely connecting with the dielectric properties of tissue. All this information only attention read. Only attention read. The action of the electric field in the UHF body is closely connecting with the dielectric properties of tissue. All this information only attention read. Only attention read. Next slide. Next. Look at the screen. All this information you write in your copybook. This mathematical description you write in your copybook too. The amount of the heat generated in the tissue dielectrics at UHF therapy. You write this information in your copybook. This mathematical description you write in your copybook too. All this information you write in your copybook too. All this information and this mathematical description you write in your copybook. Finish right. Next slide. Next slide. Next. Lecture is over. Thank you for your attention. Lecture is over. Thank you for your attention.